Hey everyone, when do you take profits on a Bitcoin investment? The answer is you don't. Bitcoin is the profits you take on investments. So let me tell you what I mean. So I just posted a podcast episode with Guy Swan of Bitcoin Audible, and it's entitled something like when do I take profits on my Bitcoin, or when do I sell my Bitcoin, or something like that. Most of his stuff is too technical, so I don't post the vast majority of his episodes, and I don't even listen to a lot of his episodes, but sometimes they're good, and I posted this one. So he makes the point, which I thought was fantastic, that he says, look, the US dollar is radically up against the Venezuelan bolivar. And so when do you take profits by moving back from the US dollar into the bolivar? And the answer is you don't. Why would you ever move from a stronger currency into a weaker currency? And if you think, oh, well, yeah, but that's because, Venezuela's currency is hyperinflated. Okay, let's use the peso. Let's say you check and you just, you find out that the, US dollar is up 50% against the Mexican peso. Well, does that mean you sell your US dollars to get Mexican pesos because you can get 50% more Mexican pesos than you could before? No, you wouldn't do that, because why would you want Mexican pesos instead of US dollars? The short take is you don't ever sell a hard currency, meaning a more scarce currency or a more credible currency, for a less credible currency. So the same is true with Bitcoin. You don't sell Bitcoin to get US dollars, because Bitcoin is the most scarce currency. Bitcoin is the strong currency. It is the equivalent, again, of saying, well, the US dollar is so up against the Venezuelan bolivar that I'm going to sell US dollars to get Venezuelan bolivar because I can get a ton of Venezuelan bolivar. The answer is, yeah, or you could just wait, because it's the Venezuelan bolivar, just like the US dollar, is just going to keep going down as compared to the Venezuelan bolivar against the US dollar, or even the US dollar against Bitcoin. So it never makes sense to move from a strong currency into a weak currency unless you need to buy something with that weak currency and you can't afford the exchange risk. Meaning, if you absolutely positively know you have to buy something with US dollars and you don't have any ability to get US dollars anywhere else, and you have enough Bitcoin to, convert to US dollars to pay for whatever it is, like a medical bill. Well, I would say finance your medical bill. Pretty much all the hospitals will do that. But if you can't do that, well, then yes, it does make sense to convert, but you're not profit taking in that situation. Profit taking is something different. So let me tell you what an example is of profit taking. So, back in 2021, at the height of the Bitcoin, or the crypto market in 2021, I made a small investment in a company called Exodus. Their ticker symbol is EXOD. And they had a complicated strategy I'm not going to go into that ultimately did not work out. But now it looks like it might work out 3.5, 4 years later. So 4 years later, it looks like their strategy might actually work out after all. And now it looks like they will be listed sometime this month on the New York Stock Exchange. And as a result of that, the shares that I bought for $27.42 are now worth like $33 a share. Now, that has underperformed Bitcoin. So to be clear, I should have just bought Bitcoin with that exact same money. But at that point, I had enough Bitcoin that I was trying to diversify, which was a dumb idea. I should have just bought more Bitcoin with that exact same money, but I didn't. So the company's stock has underperformed Bitcoin, but is now coming back because it looks like they actually will get listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Okay, so I don't know what I'll do, but I might do some profit taking there. And by profit taking, I mean I might decide I'm no longer willing to put up with the entrepreneurial risk, the execution risk, the key man risk, the competitive risk, the regulatory risk, the legal risk. There's just a gazillion risks that come with a company, and I might decide that I no longer want to deal with that and liquidate the investment and move it into Bitcoin. So, but I would, that is profit taking. It is deciding that you don't want to have an investment that has all of those risks, and you want to sit in the world's hardest currency instead, in which case I would sell that stock and I would buy more Bitcoin with it. Which I can't do right now because they're not publicly traded yet. So even if I wanted to, I can't do that right now, even if I wanted to, because their stock has not started trading. But after it has started trading, I will have the ability to do that. And I may do that. I haven't decided yet. I need to go see what the company's up to. I have a hard time selling things I've already bought, especially if I did a bunch of work to decide to buy them in the first place. I tend to not want to sell them because then it sort of feels like all that hard work was for nothing. And I did a ton of work researching this company before I bought its small amount of its stock back in 2021. But again, if I did that, that would be profit taking. It would be, I owned the stock. I owned it for 4 years. It went up, I don't know, 20, 30, 40%. Again, way worse than Bitcoin, but still not nothing. And I should have invested in more, that exact same dollars in Bitcoin instead. But here we are. And I might do some profit taking with that investment to get those funds into Bitcoin, out of an investment that has a lot of risks that I may not want to deal with, and into an investment that doesn't have all of those, well, not even investment, a currency, in the case of Bitcoin, that is something that doesn't have all those risks. Now, in the short term, Bitcoin is also an investment because there's so much upside to it, but it's also a currency, which means you don't have to deal with, the risks traditionally associated with the company. So anyway, so that's what that looks like. And so again, it just makes no sense to sell Bitcoin for US dollars. Now, sometimes you actually do need to buy stuff. So for example, back in spring/summer of 2023, I needed to get another vehicle for my family because my daughter had turned 16 and she was ready to drive. So at the time, I made the decision to liquidate some Bitcoin to buy that vehicle. Bitcoin at the time was trading in the low 30,000s, high 20,000s, low 30,000s. Now, you may think, well, Joel, you're an idiot. You liquidated Bitcoin at 1/3 its current cost to buy something. It's like, yeah, but I wasn't doing profit taking. I was not profit taking to get into US dollars. I was exchanging Bitcoin for a car and I needed the car, and I don't have any debt. I have zero debt. I don't owe anyone any money. And being completely debt free, the only alternative was to finance the car and then keep the money in Bitcoin longer and then pay it off over time. And I decided I did not want to do that because, one, I'm debt free and I've been completely debt free for years and I just wanted to stay debt free. So there's something psychologically beneficial about being completely debt free, and I wanted to stay completely debt free. And then secondly, I didn't have any US dollars to buy more Bitcoin because, or I should say to buy the car, because I had converted, the Bitcoin that I was would have used for that purpose. I had converted it, the US dollars into Bitcoin already. Now, on the upside, a lot of the Bitcoin I was using to buy that car, I had bought in 2022 and very early 2023. So it had already appreciated considerably. So the way I looked at it was I was buying the car at a, 30% discount as opposed to the way it looks like in retrospect, which was that was the most expensive Toyota Corolla that humans have ever spent money on because the exact Bitcoin that I liquidated to buy that Toyota Corolla has more than tripled in value since I bought that same Toyota Corolla. So that makes it a very expensive Toyota Corolla. Now, to be fair, since then, I've also bought a bunch more Bitcoin. So, I mean, technically you could say, well, I did liquidate Bitcoin to buy that Toyota Corolla, but ultimately I did come back later and decided to buy a lot more Bitcoin than I owned even at that time. Meaning on net, I still ended up with way more Bitcoin after I bought that car than before. But at the time I made the decision, I did liquidate the Bitcoin at that time, at that decision point. And then it was only later, weeks later or months later, that I decided to significantly amp up my Bitcoin exposure by converting even more US dollars to Bitcoin. So, but I do understand, the people who spent $100 100 Bitcoin to buy an apartment or something like that, because they wanted to be debt free and et cetera. That all makes sense. They were using the same logic I was, which is, hey, I want to be debt free. Bitcoin is money. They had been a massive appreciation on their investment. And they decided to convert their currency, Bitcoin, into something they could live in. And it made sense. And just like me, they were significantly up on the Bitcoin they owned. And they didn't want to take the risk of having it in anything they couldn't live in anymore. So I certainly understand that mindset. And, that is the mindset everyone makes. And also I'll say as well, Bitcoin looks very not risky in retrospect, but it used to be way riskier than it is now. So back in 2015, when people were buying cars or apartments with 100 Bitcoin or whatever it is, I mean, Bitcoin, the risk that Bitcoin would not become the future financial system of the world was way higher than that same risk today. Same back in spring of 2023, when I was buying a car with Bitcoin, there were no Bitcoin ETFs. It was not clear that a Bitcoin ETF would ever get approved or that Wall Street would ever adopt Bitcoin as a major asset class the way they have now. So there was all this uncertainty and all this risk that just doesn't exist today. And so part of it is you got to teleport yourself back to that same mindset. And the same will be true in the future for people who use Bitcoin to buy things today. At some point, the Bitcoin will be worth 10 times what it is today. And people will be saying, but wait, why'd you do that? And the answer is because even though the probability that Bitcoin becomes the future monetary system of the world is very high, it's not 100%. And so if it's not 100%, there will be people who decide that they don't want to take any risk. And as a result, they are using Bitcoin to buy stuff today. Because they don't want to wait, because they want to own something, or they want to live in a house that is paid for or whatever. And even if the probability that Bitcoin becomes the future monetary system of the world is 99%, they may decide that they want to have a 100% chance that they own a house. So, that is their prerogative. That's what money is. And even when Bitcoin is fully monetized as the future monetary system of the world, it will still continue to go up by 2% to 3% per year, which is human productivity growth. That's how much better we get at building things. And as humans get better at building things, then the purchasing power of a finite money goes up in value as well, because the finite amount of Bitcoin now has the ability to buy 2% to 3% more stuff every year, because that's how much better humans get at making stuff. And you've also got population growth built in there as well. Anyway, that's the highlights. Don't ever sell your Bitcoin for a weaker currency. And because 100% of currencies are weaker than Bitcoin, don't ever sell your Bitcoin to get money for something that is going to underperform Bitcoin in the long term, which is everything. Which means the only thing that it makes sense to liquidate Bitcoin for is things that improve the life of you or your family. Or in my case, I do a lot of charitable giving. So now and then I'll liquidate Bitcoin so I can do charitable giving. And yes, if I held on to that Bitcoin, I could do, the value of it would increase. But also the people I can benefit and help today, they don't want to wait around 10 years for Bitcoin to appreciate. There are people and needs in the world that I can make an impact in right now, that an impact now has a compounding effect over the years. And I want to make that impact right now. I don't want to just sit on my Bitcoin and forever and then donate it to causes that I care deeply about in the future, because that means those causes are not changing the world today. And a lot of those causes, if they change the world positively today, it has ripple effects that is very high impact. Meaning, I would rather give some of those organizations money today to change something, knowing that in 10 years I could potentially give them 10 times more. But the impact they make in the world today could potentially be 10 times more than they could make with the same amount of money, or with 10 times as much money 10 years from now. So don't convert a strong currency into a weak currency. Bitcoin is the strongest currency, so don't convert it into anything else. Not gold, not US dollars, not nothing. But only use it if you can improve the life of you and your family, which is exactly what money was intended to do all along. So have a great Sunday afternoon, everyone. Thanks.